Hello, at 1,000 subscribers, I will make a special series of stories for you. Red Mesa didn't so much rise as lean against the sky, an old shoulder of rock with a coat of rust, holding up the broad blue that went on forever. Wind pushed fine dust across the flats in whispering sheets, and the dust got into everything. Your hair, your teeth, your heart. It collected in fence corners, in seasoning cracks of porch posts, along the veins of cattle paths where hooves had turned the earth to powder. It softened the world and made the hard things fade until they didn't. Two riders cut a thin stitch through that slow-moving veil, a man and a boy, mismatched shapes against an unforgiving afternoon. The man rode like he belonged to the horse, balanced and patient, letting the animal find its breath. The boy rode like the saddle had teeth. The man was Elijah Crow of the Lazy Arrow, a name spoken out here not with fear or fondness, so much as with the quiet acceptance given to a straight fence line or the first frost, something reliable, something that showed up. He was past 40 and lean as a fence post, the kind that had been set deep and packed hard. The brim of his hat threw shade over eyes the color of ironstone. He wore a coat bleached by sun and a bandana that had known too many mornings. A rifle, scabbard hung off his saddle like a second thought. The boy was nothing like him. He couldn't fill his shirt, and his legs looked like the last sticks left in a winter woodpile. He had the pale look of someone who'd known buildings better than sky. His boots were new and blister stiff, and the way his fingers hugged the saddle horn said he was hoping it kept its promises. He didn't have a rifle. He had a worry that seemed to rattle inside him like a tin can behind a stray dog. They reached. A low rise, and the ranch spread below them, Lazy Arrow slung across the land like a man lying down after a long day. Pens squared in honest lines, a windmill clacking steady. Cottonwoods holding a thin cut of shade along a slow creek. Bunkhouse, barn, cookhouse, and the big house built from milled planks that had traveled farther than most men ever would. Cattle dotted the flats, tails flicking, ribs showing the long end of a dry season. Smoke curled from the cookhouse chimney and flattened in the wind. The place had a look like it was minding its own business, which is to say it was minding everything. That mattered dot the boy swallowed. His Adam's apple jumped like it meant to escape. That it? He asked. His voice came out smaller than he likely intended. The wind ate most of it dot. Elijah didn't answer. He nudged his horse forward. He'd said little on the ride. The boy had said too much, and then run out and chewed on silence, learning how it tasted dot at the front gate, a cobbled thing of posts and chain and hard-used plank. Someone stood guard. Not a hand in sweat-stained denim. A woman. She was maybe 25, hair the color of creek reeds dipped in night, tied back rough butt. Neat. She wore an old calico dress under a man's faded vest, and she held a rifle careful as a teacup. The muzzle knew exactly where it was pointed. Her bare forearms were the color of toffee and road dust. She watched without blinking, like a cat on a fence rail, pretending to nap. Gate was open this morning. Elijah said, his voice low, carrying more than it weighed, "You're new." The woman tipped her chin, eyes flicking over the man and the boy. "Wind likes to play with latches," she said. "I don't." The boy shifted in the saddle, caught between gratitude and alarm. She didn't look dangerous. She looked decided. Elijah swung down easy, like he was stepping onto familiar ground, which he was. "Where'd you get the rifle?" "Traded for it," she said. "My last good boots and a comb with mother of pearl set in it. I kept the teeth. They were useful. What's your name?" "Clara Bell." She didn't offer a hand. She didn't smile. Her eyes had the empty patience of someone who had watched a door too long, waiting for it to open or burn. The boy slid one leg over the saddle. then seemed to think better of it and stayed perched. His hat brim trembled. He looked at the woman, then passed her to the yard where a couple of hands were tossing bales off a wagon, glancing over without stopping their rhythm. A collie trotted close, sniffed the air around the riders, then sat down with a sigh like someone who understood his list of responsibilities. The boy found his voice at the very edge of it. "Mister," he said toward Elijah, and then cleared his throat as if he were trying to make room for courage. "Mr. Crow." Elijah's eyes moved, not his head. "Can you take her instead of me?" the boy asked. Wind leaned through the cottonwoods. A cistern chain clinked lazily against its iron ring. Somewhere a hammer tapped one nail, half-hearted, as if embarrassed to be working in such a quiet. The woman's fingers tightened once, then relaxed again along the rifles. Fore end. Elijah's jaw worked, a muscle twitch under day-old stubble, then stilled. "Can you take her instead of me?" The boy repeated, because repetition can be a kind of prayer. Clara Bell did not look at the boy. She kept her eyes on Elijah. "You don't know him," she said. "You don't know me." Elijah let out the kind of breath that changes nothing and means a lot. He stepped closer. The horse, feeling the reins go slack, dropped its head to grind at a patch of grama grass that had somehow survived cattle and sun. "Gate's not a judge," Elijah said. He wasn't much for questions when the answers didn't matter. He studied. Clara, seeing the wear on the rifle's stock that didn't belong to her hand, the way her boots had been resoled with hide and wire, the angle of her shoulders set to carry, not to collapse. He turned his head a fraction and took the boy in, and you could have measured the distance with a string. City scarecrow, windblown, and hunted. "What's coming behind you?" Elijah asked at last. Neither answered. They didn't have to. The dust on the eastern flats had a shape to it if you knew how to read. It hung heavy where it ought to drift. It pulled in a line like a seam. Men rode in it, more than 2, fewer than 10. Money didn't kick up that much dust. Trouble did. Elijah didn't glance toward the horizon. He'd already seen it on the ridge, and the knowledge sat inside him the way rain sits inside a thunderhead quiet. Until it isn't. He reached up and took the boy by the forearm. The boy startled, thinking maybe the man had chosen, had weighed and picked, as if selecting a steer from the remuda. Elijah's grip was steady, not rough. He guided the boy down out of the saddle, then, with his other hand, took the rifle from Clara Bell without contest. For a heartbeat, her gaze flared not fear, refusal to be disarmed. He flipped the rifle once, checked the chamber, handed it back. That was all. A conversation conducted in steel and wood. "Gate," Elijah said. Clara looked at him, at the boy, at the slow dust on the horizon. She stepped backward and slid the chain free. The gate groaned. Elijah led them through, not behind him, not ahead, beside him, inside the yard's fence. The lazy arrow changed scale, and the small thing spoke. The iron triangle by the cookhouse door, its bent corner where it had been dropped. The wooden notch a hand had cut into the porch post 3 summers back to track a child's height, though no child lived on the place now. A length of rawhide tied to the barn hinge to keep it from shrieking when the wind got mean. These were a different kind of fences, small ones, built to keep in what little good you had. "Who is he to you?" Elijah asked. Clara's mouth twitched. "He's not," she said. "That's the trouble and the favor." She let the words fall flat. No story hung on them. Stories fed men who were hunting, and she had none to spare. The boy found his ground, such as it was. "They ain't after her," he blurted. "They're after me. She just found me, is all." "Found you how?" "One of the hands called, loosening the cinch on a sorrel with a light blaze. Curiosity round as a coin. In a ditch. Clara answered dryly. He was practicing the art of not being seen. I ruined it for him. A couple of hands laughed, quick and uncertain, then went back to their work because Elijah hadn't said quit. Work is the rancher's church. You don't stop mid-him. Elijah looked at the boy again, and this time the boy held it. Something like spine rose up under the scarecrow clothes. The boy couldn't offer a name that would hold water, and Elijah didn't ask. Names are leaky things when the people behind you like to plug holes with bullets. From the porch, a woman in an apron Marta. The cook watched with the flat stare of someone who had lived through every sort of arrival. She wiped her hands on a towel and said to Elijah, "If they're staying, I'll put more beans on. If they're not, I'll put more coffee on." Elijah gave the smallest nod. Marta disappeared, muttering about onions. Clara rested the rifle across her forearms and faced the open yard. She stood like the wind was trying to move her and had failed twice already. The boy smelled coffee now, and wood smoke, and something almost like safety that made his knees want to fold. "What do you think you're doing?" One of the hands asked Elijah in the way a man asks another to say out loud the thing they already understand. Elijah didn't answer him either. He walked to the barn, hooked the reins of the boy's horse over a post, and loosened the saddle girth. The animal sighed, grateful. He looked back. "You hungry?" he asked the boy. The boy nodded, and then, as if that made him bold, said, "They'll pay for me, Mr. Crow, or they'll take me. Either way, they're coming. I thought maybe, if you had to choose, if you could take her instead." He looked at Clara then, and his fear rearranged itself into a clumsy, durable loyalty. "She don't deserve. Neither do you." Clara cut in, not cruel, just accurate. Elijah's eyes went to the horizon, to the seam of dust pulling closer. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of a rein until the leather darkened. Choices are tools. You pick the right one, and you don't brag about it. He saw the shape of the next hours without needing details. The lazy arrow had posts sunk deep for a reason. You don't pull them up because weather changes. He walked back to them and stopped at a distance people kept when they respected a skittish animal's reach. He took the boy by the arm again, not to claim but to steady, then took Clara Bell's wrist the way a ferryman takes. A passenger's hand, simple and transactional, and entirely about getting across. Without another word, he turned toward the house. Clara could have pulled back. She didn't. The boy could have balked. He didn't. Together, they crossed the yard as if stepping over a line someone had drawn in chalk. They went up the stairs to the porch where the floorboards had a sweet give to them, the kind of wear that means people have stood there to argue and laugh and wait. Elijah pushed open the door with his shoulder. Inside the air was cooler, shaded, thick with the smells of coffee and lye soap and leather drying on pegs. A coil of lariat hung from a nail. A map of the county, edges greasy, from fingers, was tacked to the wall with a broken spur serving as one of the pins. On a side table lay a Bible, dust soft over its gold-stamped letters. The kind of thing that sets a tone, even if it never gets read. Elijah guided them into the kitchen, where sunlight slanted across the long table. Tin plates stacked clean, the metal ringed in daylight. Marta glanced up from the stove and snorted. "Beans it is," she said, already doling them out. "Coffee'll ride with it." The boy stood just inside the doorway, hat twisting in his hands until the brim threatened to surrender. Clara leaned the rifle against the wall at an angle that would make it listen if she called for it. "You can eat," Elijah said. He pulled a couple of stools back with a scrape that sounded large in the hush. He looked at Clara, then at the boy, made a decision he'd already made. After you eat, you'll work. If what's following you wants a say, they can have it in the yard. The boy blinked. "You mean..." He swallowed the rest. He had asked to be refused, to be treated like a calf for fence wire, and the answer was something else entirely. Clara's relief, if she felt any, hid under the same plain face she'd brought to the gate. But she sat. She set the rifle where her foot could tip it up, and her hands could catch it without looking. She took the spoon Marta offered and said, "Thank you," like a person who honors small economies. Elijah didn't sit. He stepped back to the doorway and watched the yard through the screen, its ripples making the world beyond move like water. He could feel the dust coming the way a seasoned teamster can tell if a wagon wheel will hold. He lifted the rifle from its pegs by the door, checked it without fuss, and laid it against the jamb within reach. The boy took a bite, then another, then remembered to breathe. Beans can be a kind of absolution if you haven't earned the better kind. He kept his eyes on the spoon, as if any sudden movement might call the men in the dust to the table. Marta, filling cups, said to nobody in particular, "Plates wash." Easy. Blood don't. Elijah's mouth tugged at one corner, something that, on another man, might have grown into a smile. "We'll keep the plates clean," he said. Outside, a breeze tried the latch again and found it wanting. The windmill clacked, steady as a clock you couldn't wind down. A magpie landed bold on the corral fence, head cocked, glossy, and unashamed of its ugliness. "Why'd you ask that?" Clara said to the boy at last, not unkindly, just curious, like someone picking up a tool and wondering how it works. "For him to take me instead." The boy's ears went pink. "Because I can run." "Again," he said. "You look like you might be done running." He shrugged, thin shoulders lifting. Seemed like the right trade. Clara studied him. "Trades only work when both sides get what they need," she said. "You don't know what I need." "I know what I ain't worth," he said. Marta clanked the cup down hard enough to startle them both. "Eat," she ordered. Arguing burns more calories than beans provide. Elijah let their voices run under the steady metronome of the wind. Outside, he tracked the dust in the east by where it smudged the blue. By now he could count riders by the way the smear thinned and thickened. He calculated angles, the cottonwoods for cover, the shadow thrown by the barn at this hour, the way the corral gate swung and could be used as a shield if he didn't mind splinters. He thought of the hands on the place good men, not eager men. He thought of the boy's hollow cheeks and the woman's rifle-worn grip. He thought of the lazy arrow's posts, sunk deep. When the boy's spoon scraped the bottom of the plate, Elijah turned back into the room. He took 2 pairs of gloves off a hook by the door, 1 pair small and supple, 1 pair large and ugly with patches, and set them on the table like a dealer laying down cards. "After you eat," he repeated, "you'll work." He looked at the boy. "You'll fork hay, mend what won't wait, do what you're told." He looked at Clara. "You'll ride fence with me and keep your eyes open." Clara nodded once. The boy nodded 3 times. Elijah picked up his hat. "Welcome to the Lazy Arrow," he said, as if he were reminding the place itself to be hospitable. The words were simple and unpolished, like a water bucket that had hauled more than it had leaked. He went to the porch, where the light had shifted and the dust had come closer, and he stood with his shoulders square to the east. Behind him, in the kitchen, a boy learned how silence could feed a body. A woman learned how a table inside a house could make her set her rifle down without fear of it wandering away. A cook learned she'd be washing 3 plates instead of 2, which in hard times is a kind of miracle. Out beyond the gate, the horizon gathered itself. The men in that dust would arrive when they arrived. They'd find a rancher who had taken no bargains and made one anyway, a woman who'd given up a comb and gained a place at a table, and a boy who, for the first time in a long time, had heard a man say, "You'll work," and understood it for what it was, not a sentence, but a stay. The wind turned and brought the faintest sound of distant hooves, a rumor against the earth. Elijah reached for the doorframe, and without looking, made sure the rifle still leaned where he'd left it. Then he did what men like him do between weather and weather. He waited, not to see who would come, but to make sure that when they did, the lazy arrow still looked like home. The sun had slanted far enough that the long shadows of the cottonwoods reached halfway across the yard, striping the dust like bars on a cell. Inside the kitchen, the boy sat stiff at the long table, hands under the edge as if ready to bolt. The steam from his plate of beans rose straight up before the breeze caught it through the screen door and twisted it away. Elijah leaned against the far wall where the lamplight didn't quite reach, arms folded. He wasn't watching the boy so much as measuring him, the way a man measures the strength in a fence by the sound it makes when you lean on it across from the boy. Clara Bell stood by the doorway, the rifle resting lengthwise in the crook of her arms. She wasn't guarding him. She wasn't guarding Elijah. She was guarding something inside herself, and the rifle was just the most honest way to do it. The boy picked up his spoon and put it down again. The beans cooled in front of him, dark and oily, with a few shavings of onion floating on top. "I can work, mister," the boy said finally, his voice thin. "I can do anything you need. I can't go back to." He cut himself off, and his jaw trembled like it wanted to finish the sentence for him. The rest hung there like a rope swing in an empty yard. Clara shifted, eyes flicking toward him. "He's running from someone," she said. Her tone as flat as the boards under her boots. The boy looked at her, startled. "You too?" Her grip tightened slightly on the rifle's fore end. "I ain't running," she said. "Just not stopping anywhere they expect me to be." Marta, from her station at the stove, snorted into the stew pot she was stirring. "That's running with prettier words." Elijah didn't move from his post. He let the silence roll over the room like dust in a still wind. Then he stepped forward, boots whispering on the worn pine boards, and reached for the jug of water. He set it on the table between the boy and Clara, then fetched 2 tin cups from the shelf. He poured without asking who wanted it, as if thirst was an answer to a question no one had to speak. Then still without asking, he reached to the hook by the door and took down 2 pairs of gloves. One was supple and small, broken in enough to bend easy. The other was big and ugly with patches, the kind of pair a man uses when he means to save his better ones for Sunday. He set them on the table. The boy frowned. "You're giving us work?" Elijah didn't answer right away. He let his gaze shift from the boy's thin wrists to Clara's steady hands. "The windmill leaks a little," he said finally. "Fence along the south pasture is worse than a drunk at staying upright. There's calves to tag before someone else decides they belong to em. You eat, you work." The boy's mouth opened, shut, opened again. "Mister, you don't understand. I understand there's work," Elijah cut in, his voice low but solid. "And I understand if a man keeps moving, he's harder to catch." He looked at Clara. Same goes for a woman. Clara gave the faintest nod. She didn't thank him. Gratitude was a kind of coin she didn't spend until she was sure it wouldn't be counterfeit. The boy finally took a spoonful of beans, chewed like each bite was a decision, then took another. The rhythm of eating calmed the tremor in his shoulders. When the plate was nearly empty, Elijah stepped to the door and looked out across the yard. The windmill clacked in time with the dog's tail thumping lazily against the porch rail. Out, past the far fence line, the sun caught the dust on the horizon. Just a faint seam now, but holding its shape. It would be thicker by morning. He closed the screen gently, came back inside, and spoke without looking at them. "When trouble comes, it's always got a choice: walk past or stop in. Our job's to make sure it regrets either." Neither Clara nor the boy answered Elijah picked up his hat from the peg. Finish up. Daylight's short. And with that, the bargain was made without handshake, without papers, without even an exchange of names. Just two pairs of gloves on a table, the scrape of a chair, and the quiet understanding that no one was leaving alone. The days passed slow, like syrup down cold tin, but the horizon never let them forget. The dust to the east was always there thin some mornings, heavier on others, but it never drifted away like honest weather should. Elijah Crow didn't talk about it. He worked fence with Clara Bell at his side, the boy hauling staples and wire from the wagon like his arms weren't made of kindling. They mended the south line until the pliers blistered the boy's palms. Clara rode the fence, row without complaint, eyes scanning the ground the way a hawk scans sky. Sometimes she looked at Elijah as if she wanted to ask something. Sometimes she looked like she already knew the answer. In the evenings, the three of them ate at the long table Marta, dishing beans, bread, and coffee like they were ammunition, and then Elijah would stand on the porch until the dark hid his shape. He wasn't guarding so much as counting. A man can count without numbers when the measure is trouble. On the third afternoon, Clara climbed the windmill tower with a coil of wire. From up there, the world spread wide and naked under the hard blue. She was tightening the weather vane when she stopped, one hand on the rail, her body going still as a post. 4 riders. Coming. Fast. Not drifting dash aiming. She slid down the ladder in 3 clean motions, boots hitting the packed earth with a dull thud. Elijah was in the barn, checking a cinch strap, when she stepped inside. They're here, she said simply. His hands didn't pause. How many? 4, all armed. The boy appeared at the barn door, pale as chalk dust. They're here for me, he said, breath quick. They'll kill anyone standing in the way. Clara turned to Elijah, her face hard but her eyes speaking more than her voice. If they take him, I'm going too. Elijah didn't answer. He walked past both of them, toward the gun rack hanging in the shade of the porch. He took down the Winchester and checked the chamber. The sound of the bolt sliding forward was as sharp as a nail on glass. Get the sorrel saddled, he said. Fastest horses in the barn. The boy hesitated. You're going to send us out the back? Elijah's gaze cut over to him. I'm going to make sure you can run, if running's what you decide. When the riders reached the far fence, they didn't slow. Dust billowed around them, hooves pounding like a drum that only played one song violence. Their lead man was thick through the shoulders, with a long scar angling from his jaw to his cheekbone, pale against the deep burn of his skin. His eyes were mean in a casual way, like cruelty wasn't a choice for him, just the way things were. Reined in only when they were 30 feet from the porch. Scarface let the silence sit, just to show he could. Crow, he called, voice gravel rough. We'll have the boy. You know he's worth money to the right folks. The boy's breath caught in his throat. Clara shifted her weight, the rifle angled low, but ready. Elijah stepped out from the porch shade, Winchester balanced in his hands. Reckon you'll have to earn him, he said. Scarface smiled like a man who'd already decided how the next 5 minutes would go. His hand twitched toward his holster. The first shot came from Elijah, not him. Scarface's horse screamed and bucked as the bullet clipped its flank. The man stayed mounted, but his smile was gone. Clara's rifle cracked from the barn door, splitting the air and knocking the hat clean off the second rider. The boy, heart hammering, dropped the reins of the saddled sorrel and shouldered the extra rifle Elijah had shoved into his hands an hour earlier. He had never shot at anything that wasn't nailed down, but when he pulled the trigger, the slug tore into Scarface's shoulder. A sudden, violent reply stunned him. 2 riders wheeled their mounts and spurred away, their dust tails disappearing. Toward the east, Scarface gritted his teeth and grabbed his wound, but the fight had gone out of him. His horse spun under him, carrying him away whether he wanted to retreat or not. The last rider covered him, firing a wild, angry shot that punched harmlessly into the dirt at the yard's edge. Then they were gone, like a bad smell carried off by the wind that Elijah didn't chase. He stood in the open yard until the dust trail was a faint blur. Then he turned, set the Winchester back in its rack, and looked at Clara and the boy. "You both work here now," he said. "Ain't no one leaving alone." The boy looked down at his blistered hands. Clara looked at Elijah, her face unreadable, but her shoulders had lost their fight for the door tension. It wasn't mercy. It wasn't charity. It was the rancher's way, quiet, final, and uncheckable. The echoes of the gunfire still clung to the rafters of the Lazy Arrow's barn, even though the riders were long gone. The smell of powder lingered too, mixing with the tang of hot horses and sun-baked dust. Elijah Crow stood in the yard, along, while after the last hoofbeat faded, his shadow drawn long by the late sun. He wasn't looking at anything in particular, just listening, the way a man listens for something that isn't there yet, but will be. The boy's hands were trembling around the borrowed rifle. He stared at the spot where Scarface's horse had wheeled and run. A neat tear in his left shirt sleeve marked where a bullet had grazed past him, a reminder that death had been curious about him and decided to wait. Clara Bell, still by the barn door, broke open her rifle and thumbed out the empty shells. She didn't speak, but her eyes never left the eastern horizon, now quiet and empty as if nothing had happened. Marta came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She studied the three of them, the man, the woman, and the boy, with the look of someone measuring not wounds, but intentions. "Anyone hit?" "No," Elijah said. "You?" She asked the boy. He shook his head. "You will be," she said plainly, "if you don't get inside and drink some water." The boy went. Without argument, still clutching the rifle like it might vanish if he put it down. Clara lingered. "They'll be back," she said. Elijah nodded once. "Likely with more friends." "You mean to keep him?" His eyes shifted to hers. "Mean to keep both of you." Clara let that settle. There was no thanks in her face, only understanding. "Then you're going to need to see to that fence at the west draw. It's the easiest way in if you want to come quiet." "Tomorrow," Elijah said. "Tonight we keep watch." That night, the Lazy Arrow breathed slow but deep. The cattle shifted in the pens, hooves muffled in the dry earth. The windmill creaked like an old man in a rocking chair. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote yipped and was answered, its voice thin in the cool air. On the porch, Elijah sat with his back against the wall, Winchester across his knees. Clara sat opposite, cleaning her rifle by lamplight, the oiled rag catching a golden sheen. The boy slept inside on a bunk meant for a hand who wouldn't be back until roundup, his dreams. Restless but unbroken. "You gonna tell me his story?" Elijah asked quietly. "No," Clara said. "Ain't mine to tell." "You gonna tell me yours?" "No." A silence between them wasn't empty. It was thick with the unspoken agreement that some things were better carried than shared. By dawn, the desert had cooled enough that the dust of yesterday's fight had finally settled. But when the sun cleared the mesa, there were new signs, single riders moving along the far ridge, watching, not close enough to provoke, not far enough to ignore. Elijah saw them from the corral and didn't mention it to the boy. The boy was already forking hay into the feed troughs with the awkward determination of someone who'd never done it before, but meant to learn. Clara rode out to the west draw with a spool of wire and a hammer. She didn't need orders. For that. Marta served breakfast like always, the triangle's clang carrying across the yard. But there was something in the way she kept the coffee pot full hot, ready that said she knew the lazy arrow was under a different kind of siege now. When evening came and the work was done, Elijah called the boy over. He handed him a proper set of gloves, his own spare pair, worn but well cared for. "These fit better," he said. The boy pulled them on. The leather molded around his fingers like something that belonged there. "You'll work here," Elijah said. "You'll earn your meals. If men come for you, we'll meet them at the gate." The boy's eyes flicked toward Clara, who was leaning against the porch post, hat tipped low. "And her?" the boy asked. Elijah's voice didn't change. "No one's leaving alone." Over the next weeks, the lazy arrow became something different. The boy stopped jumping at every hoofbeat and started asking which wire gauge was best for fence. Clara stopped sleeping with a rifle across her chest and started keeping it by the door. Instead, the riders on the ridge came and went. Sometimes they lingered for hours, sometimes days, but they never came down. It was as if the fight in the yard had told them what kind of welcome they'd get. One night, long after Marga had banked the stove and the boy had gone to sleep, Clara stepped onto the porch where Elijah sat. "You never asked why I was at your gate," she said. Elijah tipped his hat back. "Didn't need to. I already decided you'd be staying." She studied him for a long moment. "That's not how most men make their choices." "That's the rancher's way," Elijah said, eyes on the dark horizon. "Fence don't ask the wind why it's blowing. It just holds." The wind shifted then, carrying with it the smell of rain, a rare thing on Red Mesa. Clara smiled, small and to herself. "Guess I can live with that." The porch went quiet again, the lazy arrow holding steady under the stars, and the man, the woman, and the boy bound not by blood or bargain, but by the simple fact that no one was leaving alone.